Room 13, Chapter 7. It was 3 o'clock when the children gathered on the pavement outside the hotel. There were 31 of them, and Mr. Hepworth split them into 2 groups of 10 and 1 of 11, with girls and boys in each group. "Remember your group," he said, "because we'll be in groups a lot of the time while we're here." Fliss found herself in Mrs. Evans' group, and to her disgust, Gary Bazzard was in it too. Gary was pretty disgusted himself because his best friend David Trotter had ended up in Mrs. Marriott's group. Lisa was in that group too. It was breezy but sunny and quite warm. The group set off at intervals, turning right and walking in twos down North Terrace towards Captain Cook's monument and the Whalebone Arch. Fliss's group went second. As they passed the shelter, Fliss saw that the old woman was still there. She was gazing towards the hotel and seemed to be talking to herself. The first group was looking at the monument, so Mrs. Evans led them to the arch. "Now, can anybody tell me why there should be a Whalebone Arch at Whitby?" she asked. "Yes, Roger." "For people to walk through, miss?" "Yes, Roger, I know it's for people to walk through, but why should it be made from whalebone? Anybody?" Tara Matterjack raised a hand. She was Fliss's partner. "Miss, because there were whaling ships at Whitby in the olden days." "That's right, Tara, and who knows why whales were valuable, Roger?" "Oil, miss. They used whale oil for margarine and lamps and that, and they used the bones for women's dresses, miss." "That's right." Mrs. Evans shielded her eyes with her hand and squinted up at the arch. "What part of the whale's skeleton is this arch made from, do you think?" "It's jawbones, miss," said Maureen. "Right, and they've put something on top, haven't they? It looks like an arrow. Can anybody guess what it actually is?" Everybody gazed up at the object, but nobody answered. After a moment, Mrs. Evans said, "Well, I'm not absolutely sure, but it looks to me like the tip of a harpoon, an old-fashioned harpoon, the sort they threw by hand from the bows of a whaleboat. Who's read Moby Dick?" "Miss, I've seen Jaws on the telly." "What on earth has that got to do with it, Richard Varley?" "Miss, nothing, miss." "Then don't be so stupid, you silly boy." Nobody had read Moby Dick. Mr. Hepworth's group was now approaching, so Mrs. Evans led Fliss and the others to Captain Cook's monument. They surrounded it, looking at the lengthy inscription on its plinth. "Who can tell us something about Captain Cook?" "Miss, he had 1 eye and 1 arm." "Rubbish," Michael tossed her in. "That was Lord Nelson." "Yes, Joanne. He had a peg leg, miss, and a parrot on his shoulder." "That was Long John Silver." "Dear, a fictitious character." Mrs. Evans sounded tired. When they'd finished with Captain Cook, they went down a flight of stone steps onto a road called the Khyber Pass, and from there to the seafront. There Mrs. Evans turned them loose for a while to join their classmates on the sands, while she sank onto a bench which already supported her 2 colleagues. Fliss found Lisa at the water's edge. "What do you think of it so far?" Lisa pulled her face. "Dead captains, dead whales, dead boring." Fliss laughed. "It's okay down here though, isn't it?" Lisa nodded. "You bet. Let's find some flat pebbles and play at skimming." Chapter 8. They played on the sand for an hour or so, until Mr. Hepworth called them together at the foot of the slipway which connected the promenade with the beach. "Right, what I thought we'd do between now and tea time is this. Walk along the road here and have a look at the fish quay. Then alongside the quayside to the swing bridge and over into the old town. There are lots of interesting shops in the old town, including some specialising in Whitby jet. We could have a look in some of the windows, but I don't think we should shop today, otherwise some of us might run out of pocket money halfway through the week. At the end of the old town is a flight of steps leading up to the Abbey and a church. There are lots of steps, and I want you to count them as we go up and tell me how many there are. We'll go in groups again. Do you know your group, Barry-tune?" "Sir." "Good, here we go then." The 3 teachers moved apart and called their groups to them. The children got into twos, and this time Fliss had Gary for a partner. He grinned at her. "Holding hands, are we?" "No chance. Have to eat my tea with this hand when we get back. I'll be using a knife and fork. Ha, ha, ha." They looked at the fish dock, but there were no boats in, and the sheds with their stacks of fish boxes were shut. They went along the quayside, threading their way between strolling holiday makers looking in shop windows or at the different kinds of boats in the harbour. There was that exciting smell in the air which you get at the seaside, that blend of salt and mud and fish and sweet rottenness which has you breathing deeply and makes you tingle. They were taking their time. The evening meal was not until 6:30, and Fliss was looking at a coble with her name, Felicity, painted on its prow. Then Gary grabbed her hand and cried, "Hey, look at this!" "What?" She spoke irritably and jerked her hand away, but looked where he pointed and saw a narrow building with dark windows and a sign which said, "The Dracula Experience." A tall man with a pale face, dressed all in black, smiled from the doorway at the passing group. His teeth seemed quite ordinary. Gary raised his hand and waved it at Mrs. Evans. "Miss, can we go in here, miss, please?" Mrs. Evans, who had been looking out over the harbour, turned. She saw the building, read the sign, smiled faintly and shook her head. "Not just now, Gary, on Thursday. Everybody will be given some free time to shop for presents and spend what's left of their money in whatever way they choose. You'll be able to buy yourself some Dracula experience then." She looked into the eyes of the smiling man and added loudly, "If you must." They crossed the bridge and sauntered through the narrow streets of the old town till they came to the church steps. By the time they reached the top, Fliss was out of breath. She'd counted 197 steps, but Mr. Hepworth, whose group had got there first, said there were 199, and she believed him. The top of the steps gave on to an old graveyard. Weathered stones leaned at various angles, so eroded you couldn't read the epitaphs. Long grass rippled in the wind. There was a church and a breathtaking view of Whitby and the sea. They had a look inside the church. It was called St. Mary's. Mr. Hepworth pointed out its special features. You could buy postcards and souvenirs by the door. Fliss brought a postcard of the ruined abbey to send home. When they were gathered outside, she said, "Are we going to the ruins, sir?" She wasn't sure whether she wanted to or not. "Not today, Felicity. We'll be looking at them on Wednesday morning before we set off to walk to Saltwick Bay." They poked about in the churchyard for a while and visited the toilets near the abbey. Then they descended the 199 steps and began making their way back to the Crow's Nest. The fresh air and exercise had sharpened everybody's appetite, and most of the children spent the walk back wondering what was for tea. Fliss did not. She was thinking about the landing at the top of the house and what it would be like in the dark. The funny thing was, she seemed to know.